Hello, my name is Bianca Winata Putri, and I'm the Public Programs Coordinator at ACA. I am zooming in today from my living room/home office. I am a Chinese Indonesian woman in her mid-20s. I have glasses on and I'm wearing a black sweater. I'm sitting close to my computer, so you can only see my head and shoulders, with white walls behind me and a red-colored frame artwork. There is also a relatively huge Monstera plant in the background as well. It is our pleasure to welcome you to ACA's 2021 lecture series, Experimental Institutionalism, Contemporary Art and Curatorial Ecologies. ACA's lecture series explores an array of artistic, exhibition, curatorial, editorial, and institutional models that are shaping contemporary art and curatorial practice in these radically changing times. The series seeks to explore alliances that can be drawn across borders, as well as the ways in which we might work and learn differently in response to the specificities of locality, place, culture, and community. For this third dialogue in the series, we are delighted to welcome and introduce Jakarta-based collective Ruangrupa and Adelaide-based the Unbound Collective, with a focus on expanded collectivity and solidarity in changing times. The format for this dialogue involves two independent presentations of approximately 20 minutes each, followed by a conversation between our guests. Ruangrupa will be presenting on notions of solidarity, collaboration, and hanging out, or in Bahasa Indonesia, nongkrong, being central to their collective practice. Following Ruangrupa's presentation, the Unbound Collective will address ideas of community, responsibility, and the impossibilities of individualism in their lecture titled Monstrous Intimacies, Collectivity and Unbound. Before introducing our speakers, I would like to acknowledge the Bunwurrung and the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations as sovereign custodians of the land on which ACA is located, and we extend our respect to elders past, present, and emerging. It is now my great pleasure to welcome Ruangrupa, a Jakarta-based collective established in 2000 and artistic director of Documenta 15 in 2022. Ruangrupa strives to support the idea of art within urban and cultural contexts by involving artists and other disciplines such as social sciences, politics, technology, and media to give critical observation and views towards Indonesian urban contemporary issues. Ruangrupa also produced collaborative works in the form of art projects such as exhibition, festivals, art labs, workshop, research, as well as books, magazines, and online journal publication. We are joined today by members Reza Afisina, Farid Rakun, and Mirwan Andan. Welcome, Mas Reza, Mas Farid, and Mas Andan. It is equally my pleasure to welcome and introduce the Unbound Collective. Based in Adelaide, Unbound Collective's research and practice respond to and interrogate state colonial archives through public performances and embodied projections. Their performances move through spaces that have historically seen Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians excluded from the narrative. Their practice also explore notions of ethical practice and responsibility and enacting sovereign identity and re-representation through memory and storytelling. The collective consists of Ali Baker, Simone Tour, Faye Blanche, and Natalie Harkin. And we are joined today by Ali, Faye, and Simone. Welcome. Thank you again for joining us. It's a great honor to have your involvement in our 2021 series of dialogues and to focus today on expanded collectivity and solidarity in changing times. Mas Reza, Mas Farid, and Mas Andan, over to you.
Thank you very, very much, Bianca. Really nice to meet you, Unbound Collective, as well. Thank you for everyone who's here. Although this is pre-recorded, we want to thank the audience, future audience, whoever they might be. I'm here from Jakarta. I'm Farid. I'm joined by Andan and also Reza Asung Afisina. So sometimes we will call each other by nicknames. from Kassel, both of them. So really nice to see you too as well, because it's been a while since I saw you. I'm going to start in a very short introduction about Ruangrupa, because we cannot assume that everyone knows about Ruangrupa, but also apologize from us if anyone of you have seen this video before. I'm going to talk over a video, then I'll hand it out to Andan and Asung as well after it. Ruangrupa, as has been mentioned before, we started in 2000 by 7 artists, and then I'm not one of them. Out of all three, I think like Reza would be the one who has been the longest with Ruangrupa. And then we started in Jakarta. A lot of times because we were young ones, no, like we're older at least now, but we started with like two things, I think, like because it's very, very specifically Jakarta, it's quite an expensive city compared to other cities or places in Indonesia, but like because of that, we started either on the street, so the street became our canvas and exhibition space, or we just like shrink our studio to become like a desktop studio. So like a lot of media art, sound, music, etc., etc. And because of that, like we still keep that sensibilities, let's say, like making markets, for example, as a research method, and something that's beyond exhibition, let's say, and then doing things in public spaces. We are still doing it up until today, let's say. And then we also like the understanding of domestic spaces, because like a lot of other collectives in Indonesia, we started by renting houses and then turn something that's private, let's say, turn it into much more public usage. So as you can see here, this is kind of like the first years of Ruangrupa, let's say, that we changed living room from a house to become like exhibition space, workshop space, screening space, even forum space, all those kind of stuff. And then, as has been mentioned as well before, we built what we understood as the kitchen, which is basically like we provide or establish infrastructures because like certain things were not there at the moment, you know, like that's why we built like workshops for curatorial and art writing, for example, or what you are seeing right now is Jakarta 32, it's called. It's a biannual student forum, because at that moment there was a need from students. I was a student at that moment as well, so I felt the need to meet other students from different disciplines and different schools, let's say. And then that forum became also an exhibition in National Gallery. When I said National Gallery, it's not something, the nuance is not the same with like National Gallery in the Western context, let's say. But yeah, it has started that way, infrastructures like that. Then as well, like besides Jakarta 32, like there's something called OK Video, like biannual as well. International video art started at least as video art. Right now it's media art. New media art exhibition or festival. Because at that moment as well, like we were interested in talking about video art in a specific way, but like it's very little to none, let's say, people or platform that were providing us with that. So we just decided to build ourselves, you know, these festivals, basically like festival making, event making, exhibition, workshop, all those kind of stuff. It's kind of like a way for us to learn from each other. So like for OK Video, for example, it's also an alibi for us to be able to invite people that we were interested to learn from based on their works or like even their thinking. So we can invite them to come, to talk to us, to teach us something, let's say. So yeah, that's basically like how we build our certain sensibilities in event making. So none of us up until right now, even like in Documenta 15, let's say, none of us are trained classically as curator. So we kind of like learn how to curate, how to make events, how to stage something based on experience. Also like our experiences exhibiting somewhere else. Like for example, this one is for Asia Pacific Triennial, where we stage museum inside a museum, let's say. So it's based on a mix between fictional and real history about the Kuda is a band called, the meaning is horse, let's say. It's a punk band from Bogor near Jakarta. And then we imagine if the Kuda was there in the 70s and then had certain influence, you know, of a punk movement in Australia as well, relating to the political situation in Australia at that moment. And then we had even like, you know, launching of the albums of the Kuda, and then even like asking Australian punk bands to do covers of the Kuda song and perform it basically during the triennial. And then through that as well, we learn how to work locally. Like for Sao Paulo Biennial, for example, we work with a lot of collectives based in Sao Paulo itself. So we gave our space in Sao Paulo Biennial, the designated space for us. We kind of like share it with Paulista collectives, let's say. So not only exhibiting, screening, making workshops, but also kind of like rethinking on how a biennial could play a local role, on how to touch their neighbors, basically. So maybe Asung and Andan wants to talk about something or add on something on the introduction before we continue somewhere else.
I think I would like to add more into the relations when in the beginning, we start how we work collectively, especially in the Jakarta's context, because most of us, we already into deep relations since our college time back in the 90s. And then around of that years, as you mostly find out that most of us like really dealing with the new order regimes. And this is like really also put us in several different positions, especially to regard ones that we studied into art educations, and then suddenly we deal with the most of these repressions rather than expression. So, and aside of that, career-wise, for sure, in the Jakarta's context, it is like really impossible even for us to like really position ourselves as a visual artist, or as a visual artist, for example, to regard different, to regard most of the practices it is indeed we are considering ourselves as an artist, but how we try to manage this is just to most of our times like really meet up and then generating different kind of event inside of our academy, or even in this very small circle of our societies, for example, mostly is inside the campus area. And not most of us came studied in Jakarta for sure, but every time that we met all together, especially with Ade, for example, the ones that also up until now still together with us, and also with Indra. For example, me and Indra, it came from the same art institute back in Jakarta, but Ade went to Yogyakarta. But Ade is a Jakartans, so every time we met, actually we make something together, like music events or small exhibition event. But it's always related to these connections to our campus during that time, because if we're doing it outside, that it's considering underground, and then this actually, like, this strategy is quite sufficient for us to like really do something together in the short of a collective way of working, or we working as a together, because during that time it's much more easy for us to like really doing this activities all together, for sure. And in the year, like in the year 98, when the new other regimes is stepping down, so we were thinking like how we should continue to regard our practices so far, because most of it is not like that quite relate to this collectivity artistic of processes or even approach, mostly like from our individual levels. But we are thinking that to strategize ourselves by challenging these so-called structures, artist initiative. What is artist initiative? How they could find together, being together, and then generating more into this alternative space, let's say, because there's quite mushroomy when the end of the new order regimes. There's lots of NGOs coming. There's lots of like generating into what's so-called becoming like self-organized and creating organization, something like that. So this is like in the beginning. But how about within this artistic point of view? Actually, this is part of our questions. That's why, like what Farid said, rather than we are questioning, so it's better for us to like really practicing. So probably this is already in our genetics, like it's quite natural. For example, if we would like to have some sort of discourse to regard, let's say, artists in residency, we don't want to put it as a method of as a theory, so we just like make it happen. like how it is necessity for us to like really building up the sense to articulate, but it's also to have its much more reasons and warrantable on why we could create these so-called artists in residencies or art projects, or let's say like festival or new medias. But actually for us, it's not like only generating the importances of having this particular event together to meet like different friends all around, but it's also for us to like really sense on how we would like to educate ourselves, to criticize, to evaluate the things that we've mostly done, and also to questionings to regard what it's happened to the societies, especially in the close connect within our neighborhood, for example. And doing that, so for example, using National Gallery, actually it's not about the statement of using National Gallery as a space, but it's because that's quite accommodating, and it's quite providing in relations to the facilities, for example, because we cannot do it in our places, because most of the time since 2000s up until 2007 2016, we always every 2 years we have to move to find like a cheap rented houses. So that's why when we have the connection to the National Gallery, for example, this is one of the big steps. At least we could use the space, not about the name of the space itself. So that's why this is like really quite, for us, is quite lucky, at least during that period, that we are trying to find most the ecosystem. How we going to generate ecosystem like this in Jakarta, and also to always questioning, to always keep adjusting, adapting, not putting all these practices into method or formulations, but rather than into discussions, more into broader, not discourse, but broader way to find ourselves like in very relaxing conversations, to hang out, to mostly interact with these close societies where we situated, where we living, and then suddenly we challenge again when suddenly we have friends that could come from different countries, for example, and share this method all together. So this is the things that we are keeping alive. just to simulate more into lively conditions, and especially during the pandemic, for example, let's say in Indonesia's context, we start to have this pandemic situations. It's, I think, March 2020, just like Andan mentions. So during that time, we are realized that we are now is challenging about the notions of collectivities or collectiveness in our ecosystem. And then suddenly we brought up also the scape into the notions on how we are now dealing with this process for Documenta 15, for example. But also the most important for us, how to deal with our ecosystem back in Jakarta in good school. So this is probably the things that I would like to add. So I will pass the mic to Mirwan Andan. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Farid and Reza. I would like to add more on the notions of diversity, solidarity, and the issues that Bianca already mentioned before. As I'm not, I was not born and raised in Jakarta. I was born and raised in Makassar, and then I moved to Jakarta in 2005, and then met and hang out with Ruangrupa since 2005, and that's how I have been hanging out. So I use the tense present perfect continuous tense. I have been hanging out since then, 2005 up until now, and then this is how actually the essence of how Ruangrupa has been operating or has been practicing the lumbung values or the lumbung notions. The practice that we hang out and then everything on the put on the table, and then anyone can access all the resources on the table, from information to from information opportunities, so everything puts on the table. So and this is also deals with the how diverse Ruangrupa is since the beginning. Yeah, there was an awareness that the initiative, this collective, is not only, or it cannot be run by only with the art activities or with, and not only with the artists. That's how like people like me, or like Farid also, who was trained as an architect, or and me, I was trained in the literature and also in political science, can have a how to say, can have time to join, and then to hang out, and then to share what I know, to share what I'm capable of to the collective, and then it's also this also reflect that the diversity of Ruangrupa is also based on, for example, the religious background and also the ethnicities background. As you may understand, that Indonesia is a country with a very diverse, with more than 17,520 something islands. So, and then even though it's in Jakarta, as Bianca mentioned earlier, it's always deals with the urban context, but after 20 years, we realized that it's not only the urban context or the urban issues that we are working on, or we have been working on, but also we work on some issues that deals with the localities, which is not only Jakarta, but many localities, and also from geographical wise in Indonesian context. For example, there are programs that we organize deals with these issues, and also that's how lumbung as the concept we bring to Documenta 15 is also because we inspired by the practices, by the values, by the notion which are being practiced by many localities and also many places throughout the archipelago in Indonesia. So as also none of us in Ruangrupa were trained as a curator, but as we realized that we were not trained as a curator, so we organized a curatorial workshop. It was in 2008, and then because not to train people to be curator, but also at the same time for us is to learn that curating curating is maybe something from different practices, from different contexts, but maybe there's something in there that we can how to say, we can tackle as a practice that compatible with our practice and context in Indonesia. Yeah, I think that's from me. Yeah, thank you, Bianca. And
thank you, Ruangrupa, for the talk so far. We're the Unbound Collective, and we are speaking to you from the unceded Kaurna country in Adelaide, South Australia. Simone and I are located on the Kaurna Plains near Karawira, which is the Red Gum River, and Faye's down on the beach. So my family are Murning, we're from the Nullarbor, and I've grown up on Kaurna country, but my nana was born on the edge of the desert, and my great-grandmother was born on just over the border into Western Australia. It's about a 14-hour drive from where we are now, but still kind of in South Australia. I'll let my sisters introduce themselves.
Thank you. Again, thank you, Ruangrupa, for your presentation on your work as a collective. I'm from the Yangonjara community, which is northwest of South Australia. So a similar drive in terms of hours, about 13 to 14 hours from Adelaide, from Kaurna country to Yangonjara country. I'm from desert country, and I just want to acknowledge that we're presenting on Kaurna land.
Hi, and yeah, thank you. I really enjoyed the conversation, the lecture, beautiful. It's exciting. I find it really exciting. So thank you for sharing your work. I'm a rainforest girl. I'm from a place called the Atherton Tablelands. And it was rainforest, but every time I go home, the trees get chopped down. And so you kind of feel a bit lost when you go there. It's in the state of Queensland, so it's a different state, obviously, to South Australia. And it probably would take me 3 days or 2.5 days to drive really fast to get to where I live. At the moment, I'm on Kaurna Plains. I'm on the Kaurna people's country, and I feel very privileged to be here. So thank you. Ali, you want to go now and introduce?
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit. So the Unbound Collective, we're a group of Aboriginal women artist collective. We also need to acknowledge our sister girl, Natalie Harkin, Dr. Natalie Harkin, who's a Narungga woman from the Yorke Peninsula, and also a member of our collective. And then we have a lot of collaborators that we work with, including Simone's daughter niece, Caitlin Inawanji Morrison, and sometimes we work with other artists as well. So we formed in 2014, and the title of our talk today is really thinking about monstrous intimacies and, I guess, collectivity and how and ideas of individualism. So I guess we're all academics working at Flinders University in Adelaide, and we've been teaching our histories, Indigenous histories, for collectively over 20 years, all of us. And we teach mainly non-Indigenous students. A lot of the Aboriginal community don't always make it into the universities, but we also have worked collectively in Unbound First Nation Centre for Higher Education and Research, which is our First Nation centre at Flinders Uni, and worked with our communities in thinking about holding space within white institutions of knowledge production. So collectively, I'm a trained visual artist, and then Simone's she's been a professional actor, but she's also the most senior Indigenous academic at our university. So she holds a title, Pro Vice Chancellor Indigenous, which we're very proud of our sister. Faye Roses Blanche and myself work teaching a major, which is Indigenous and Australian Studies major in the College of Humanities, Arts and Social Sciences. And then Natalie's on a big research grant, Australian Research Council grant, looking at the forced labour histories of Aboriginal women in South Australia, which is largely an unwritten history, a suppressed history of our peoples in this country. We formed together because we were all very isolated in a very individualist kind of institution where you're expected to kind of work individually to promote yourself and ultimately kind of engage in kind of quite selfish ways of being. And we weren't raised like this. We've been raised by groups of Aboriginal people. We always work better and are much happier. So I like the idea of hanging out. We have so almost the difference between laughing and crying. Sometimes we laugh so much together, and sometimes the kind of work and the kind of histories that we have to teach are so violent and sometimes so traumatic that it's not good for us to work individually. So we started thinking about this as a teaching methodology, but also about how we might break these knowledges out of the institution and think about bringing them to our communities and where our communities were. We really thought about this idea of what were the reasons why we wanted to be scholars, what were the reasons why we the ideas that we bind ourselves to and the ideas that would potentially set us free. So the kind of possibility of freedom and what that freedom might mean, and not as a white kind of freedom, but as not as a kind of absence of suffering, but as a kind of collective loving relationality that is engaged and located in very specific histories. So for us, this became a very big philosophical and ethical question. And obviously we're really interested in Indigenous and Black scholars from all over the world. So we read Collectivity a lot. We're all Faye's just about to submit her PhD, and we've all gotten our PhDs in the process of being a collective. And so we perform, we write about our performances, we think about institutionalization, we work in between institutions, we disrupt and perform in spaces where our people's bodies have, they've attempted to contain us. So I started my PhD and I was really considering the violent physical anthropology that had occurred in Adelaide, and particularly on the family of my family's bodies. So my great-grandmother died in the Royal Adelaide Hospital, and a non-Indigenous ethnographer called Norman Tyndale cast her face and her body and kept that cast in the museum as part of the history of the inferior race. This idea of physical anthropology and the collecting of our old people's bones. Adelaide was a capital of this. So currently the South Australian Museum holds over 4,000 of our old people's bodies, bones, and they're yet to be repatriated back to communities. These bodies were shipped all over the world. And when you try and teach about this to people, it's almost too difficult to understand how sad it is for our communities, but also the resistance and refusal that we've engaged with. So we thought about this idea of resistance and the possibility of somehow engaging in a ceremony that allowed us to honour the call of our ancestors from within those archives and theoretically kind of free ourselves from the collective weight of that, or share that weight differently in loving ways. So this was one of our first performances, and I can share, and I'll let my sisters talk soon. I'm a real talker, so I've convinced them all. Fazer, like they're all amazing, so I'll let them, but I'm just going to share my screen. We started in 2014, and we have been working across the spaces. So we worked in an artist-run initiative in Bowden, and then we did some work at Tarnandy Festival of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Art. And then we were also commissioned by Vital Statistics to make a work in Port Adelaide. And then we were also commissioned by the national, so by the Museum of Contemporary Art, Claude Bullen, in 2019, and we decided to perform at the Art Gallery of New South Wales. So we were projecting resistance poetry onto the colonial paintings, and we worked with the local community there. So behind in this photo of Faye, you can see Annie Rhonda Dixon, Natalie Harkin, and some of the performers from La Perouse, some of the Gadigal community.
Thanks, Camilla. So yeah, our work is very much site specific. And when Ali mentioned when we first began in 2014, we were really thinking about our own individual intergenerational stories, and also our own historical records, but also what a future imagining might look like as well. And one of the processes of actually really thinking about that work is our individual strengths that make us a collective. So as Ali mentioned, Faye's an incredible performer in spoken word, Nat's a poet, Ali's a visual artist, curator, performer, and I'm a singer performer as well. But also, so one of the things that we really thought about was how do we invite our audiences to actually enter into this space, to think about sharing that burden, that weight of colonialism. And one of the processes that we undertook was actually having members of the audience actually sign into a discarded data record, a data museum book, which actually it collates information about anyone. In this context, we're talking about the enormous amount of data collation of our communities, around our bodies, around our lives. And so part of that process is actually encouraging the audience to think through that. But as well as that, part of our work that we do is actually we also write sovereign act love poems. So we're also interested in the idea of love, and what does it mean to be loving of ourselves when we've been told that we are not worthy of love, or we are distasteful, or, you know, just sort of the representations around Aboriginal people, but in our context, talking about Aboriginal women, the language around that. So what does it mean to love ourselves as Aboriginal people, and love ourselves as sovereign, learning, Yangon-Jara, Narungga, and Yidinji Mabarbaran Aboriginal women in this state. And so that's been a really important process of actually enacting our performance. As Ali said, it is very much site specific. So we work with whether on Ghana country, or like in the image that you just saw on Gadigal country in New South Wales, we work with elders and community to think through what it means to be on this site, on their country, because we're out of country, and engage in that really important element of cultural protocol as well. Fabo.
I love what you both said. I feel like I can't say anything else. I think I was thinking around the idea of monstrous intimacies and the whole concept of how we start to discuss the social construction of race. So Ali mentioned that we teach into our Indigenous topics. And as we teach into that, we really dig deep in the concept of what it's like to be human, which is, again, what is it like to love yourself? What is it like to love yourself as a woman, but also as a community member, educator, everything that we bring into a particular space. And I guess the idea of localities that Adan, I think, spoke to really shows the stuff that we do in this, you know, so there's the similarities that speaks to that. And I guess it's the way we move our bodies in those spaces, because they are colonial spaces. And for us as Indigenous women, they can be quite dangerous places. And so what does it mean to actually allow ourselves to feel safe in those dangerous spaces? Because often, you know, we are a minority, so we're a small peoples, if that makes sense. And so as a minority, we really have to kind of blend and mold ourselves and become strong. And I think that's the force. So in a way, we're a force to be reckoned with, I would say. And I think we're kind of intellectual warriors. So there's no kind of doubt around the way that we can move through particular spaces. But it's also about owning who we are in that space. And how do we be human in that space, knowing that human is a social construct. So we know ourselves as being racialized. We have the racialized profiles. We know the idea of how we are seen as women. So there's the sexuality stuff. And we also know that we weren't seen as human. And so our history tells us, you know, the process of dehumanize was key to the way that Black bodies were seen in the country of Australia. So we really pushed through in our intellectual scholarship, as well as our research, as well as our methodology, and also our performance. And I think it's the performances that we do that can really, really connect us. And I really love that about our performance. And I think that's what's really brilliant about the idea of being a collective, because you can't do it on your own. You cannot be individual in this kind of concept. And also we can get laughed at. We can actually be challenged if we think that we can do it by ourselves. And so it's safer for us. So I don't know what else to say, but I guess there would be more to say as we have the conversation. But you know, we talk about decolonizing. We talk about, you know, moving through a space and decolonizing that space. Now, I know that's a word that a lot of people are talking about, but because we teach about race, because we unpack the social construction of race, I think what we do is actually start to say, okay, so if we're decolonizing this idea of race, what does that mean? And so, you know, it's a quite an in-depth thinking, I think. That's me saying that. Thanks, girls.
I also, so to add to what Faye's talking about, in terms of decolonizing for us, it's about deinstitutionalizing our bodies. So, and it's about, I guess, the administration of our bodies within institutions. So what part of who we are exists outside of these institutions, and what is uncontainable about who we are. And I think, you know, Aboriginal people are the most incarcerated minority in this country. Our children are removed at a growing rate, but we are also the most famous artists in our country. And when you're talking about this country now known as Australia, we're talking about what does it mean to be sovereign and live off country, because there's over 250 different Aboriginal language groups and specific individual kind of cultural understandings and views of place. So for us, it's also about having conversations in a place where a lot of people who live here don't know their own history. They don't know about who we are. They don't know about the violence that's been perpetrated in the colonisation of this space, and that's been a deliberate oppression of those particular histories. So how do we think lovingly and collectively without making ourselves sick to share those histories in ways that on our terms, on our own terms? And I guess that has to be collective, but it also has been about intergenerational, what we want to give to our children, what we want to give to the community, and then, you know, being really, really smart about and ethically being really engaged in kind of a collective consciousness, which I think is becoming more. Students that we're teaching at the moment at the university, a lot of them are really open to the idea of multiplicity of self. So people are talking about themselves and in non-binary terms. So they're talking about themselves as multiple beings. And in a way, ideas of community are changing in that sense of like a global community, like a sense of a collectivity of understanding. So individualism is not suiting us as much anymore. So we have to think outside of reducing things down to one. And for us, that's always been the way our old people have worked. And so those conversations about how we rethink and restructure our communities and thinking about justice and solidarity in relation to that are really vital conversations. They keep us alive, you know, they keep us strong. And we also think about it as writing as revenge, right? Because, you know, ultimately you know, like I think about Vincent Namatjira talked about this idea of our art is our weapon, you know, and Faye's written a poem called Faye and Simone performed it, My Pen is My Weapon. You know, in a sense, we engage in peaceful struggle with ideas of justice through our art, if that makes sense. Yeah.
And I think it's despite the attempts of colonial genocide in this country, I think what we do is we draw on, as Ali mentioned, our old people and their long-held philosophies of this country, but also honouring their activism in the past, but how we enact that in the present to the future, whether it be about climate change, whether it be about anti-nuclear activism, whether it be about Black Lives Matter, and really bringing that activism through performative expression and creative expression, through song, through embodied movement. And when we did perform with Tanadi, between the museum, which Ali talked about, the collections of our old people, and some significant key buildings in that site, Natalie talked about we're repatriating love back to our ancestors. And when we move through those buildings now, there's a different feeling, there's a different embodied emotion and relation to those sites. Not to say that they don't still have oppressive institutions or you know, sites of knowledge that still represent us in a particular way, but as a collective we've been able to shift that feeling as well.
And I guess we also protect each other from, like, we work in institutions that are controlled by mainly white men, and ultimately it can be very superficial sometimes, the art world. It can be like, it's why I didn't really want to, when I graduated in the 1990s from art school here, it was very difficult for not a lot of Aboriginal people working nationally. It wasn't cool. You know, it wasn't cool when I grew up in the 80s to be Aboriginal in this country. It wasn't. And so I didn't see my histories reflected in the education that I got. And part of the kind of wanting to work in our communities, wanting to do something that was contributing to us seeing ourselves. And so, you know, in 2014, when we first started, I was collecting, we try to tell the students what it was like to be at uni before the internet. And, you know, you had to go to the library and there was books, and, you know, you had to really look hard to find information about and to see yourself, us as Aboriginal people, like Murning, there wasn't anything written in a book, and it's hard to find Indigenous people globally. And it was all the white canon of art. So, and I think about when my mother grew up, she could only find books that basically were racist descriptions of who we are as Aboriginal people. Either that, or they totally excluded us from the national narrative. So we were written out of our So Australia, it's all just white people, no Aboriginal people. It's like we didn't exist here for 60,000 years. It was just suddenly just a group of white people. So I started collecting these texts that had been thrown away to the secondhand shops, that had been thrown out of the libraries because no one borrows them anymore, and stacking them up just as a kind of a personal purge. Somehow get it out of me, stack it up, and then everyone can have a look at it, at what the atmosphere of the kind of knowledge that's been created around us, and how that makes us feel when we go into our schools and our universities and see nothing of who we are. How does that make us feel? And I just stacked them up, and ACCA exhibited it for unfinished business, 8.5 meter high single stack of racist texts going, and it could have just kept going. We could keep collecting these racist texts because so much was written in the justification for the killing of us, the silencing of us. It's just this endless stream of kind of how unworthy we are, how base our culture, how this, how that, you know, and this idea of human that Faye talks about, this dehumanizing, is not just in this country, it's international. And so when we talk to the students about this and we think about it in relation to art, that has been an incredibly useful and important way of moving that conversation on very quickly. Very quickly we can get to the guts of what it is that's been happening for us, and that's helped us and inspired us, made us feel happy, made us feel energized, like we've got things to share, and they're important. Thank you, Bianca.
Thank you, Ali, Faye, and Simone for the excellent presentation. It was really great to hear about all of your practice, really. And I find what was very interesting from both of your lectures is this kind of shared ideas and I guess also emotions of like what Ruangrupa said with hanging out and mushroomy, the organic kind of relation making through your practice, but also in Unbound Collective's case, love. And I find that that is such a binding thing in all of your practice, is that you're creating a very welcoming space. And I'd just like to throw how do you cultivate this sense of belonging or belongingness through your collective practice? And I might throw it first to Ruangrupa with Mas Andan, if you'd like to add to that.
Okay, I would like to add some, and I'm pretty sure that Reza will also add some parts of after me. The first thing first, when we want to, because Ruangrupa is from the beginning is to have a space. So the space, as earlier mentioned by Reza and Farid, that we in the beginning we always rent a living room or a living house in Jakarta, and anytime we try to rent a new place or a new house, and then after renting the house, is that not to soon organize programs or making arts exhibition and things, but first thing first is to know better the neighborhood where we are, because that's why the locally anchor is one of the value that we really believe that people who are already been in there long before us, they know better. They know much better the situation. They know much better the neighborhood. They know even better the history of the place as a both as part of the grand narration of the history, but also in the minor history of that place. So hanging out here is really a thing that hanging out with the local people, the neighborhood is the first thing we always did, like from organizing food and then eat together, and then from coming from one house to only meet and then to say hi. to say hi, and then introducing ourselves, and then also that's how also we get to know to those people what they have been doing, what their professions, if they are a family, how many kids they have, and then in case there's something we can do something in the future with. That's why, for example, we now have Ruru Kids, a program on the on the activities they involving kids. So yeah, things like that is always being the first thing first to do when we never want to be like like unidentified arriving object in one place, and then suddenly do something, then it's not well connected with the localities where we are. But yeah, first thing first is to connect, to connect with the surrounding, with the neighborhood, and also that as I mentioned, that locally anchored is important, and then humor also will really be important here, because yeah, humor is about breaking the ice. Humor is about breaking the ice of try to melt all the things that are sometimes can never be break with serious things. So yeah, that's why, like in Ruangrupa, we really like to share stories, jokes, and also things that can trigger a love one or two. And also, I want to also mention that since the beginning, Ruangrupa is not a family-based initiative, but after 20 years, it becomes a family among us. It's become like really a family, even though there is no like a direct blood relations, or but yeah, for me that it's a family. And also can mention this later, that how we really put solidarity as a family is one of the notion that can make us last for 21 years up until now, and then hope we can make more many years to come. I think that's for me. Reza, I'm pretty sure Reza will add some more.
Actually, there's like two options, yeah, and then sometimes we could add some more, or we could just put less. but anyhow, we need to reduce or to increase. So this is the things that way of going within the conversation. But true, like in Indonesian's context, this have a sense of like meeting other persons. It's always come in very natural way behavior, because we are big archipelago, 17,000 islands, different kind of tribes, accents, and languages. Even most of us, like me, I came from a different province, but mostly crammed in Jakarta, or probably most of us like just coming to Java. So since the beginning, if you already mentions about within the colonialization era, or even during the trade routes, most of them is only coming to Java. So this is also creating more problematic situations up until we are independence, let's say. Even our late first president Sukarno is always acknowledging the sea actually is part of our land. Just to think toward about these mentalities that we are indeed as a part of the nations up until the West. Even though up until now there's like still lots of quite a frictional tensions up into West Papua, for example. But since the beginning, even before the our revolutionary war up until the independence, actually we already acknowledged that West Papua is our brothers too. So in the sense, like this knowledge, and then suddenly, because probably of the natural resources, and then suddenly most of the ally during that time would like to taking back some things that they could not get during the World War II, probably, or something like that. So there's lots of tensions to regard these policies, politics, and histories, and also it's always affected to our society nowadays up until now. So this is also like generate more into different what kind of histories or narrations throughout it that we would like to accept, because like in the new order regimes, like Andan said, they create different histories, even not to acknowledge that the sea actually is a part of our nations, but it feels like we are separate because of the sea. So people think it's always thinking about the state of the land. So this is also generating different narrations, and mostly our second late president Suharto, it came from Java, and so like this Java centristic indeed it's also problematic to, and then suddenly they came into this military approach just to make all stabilize, creating like different command posts within military in each of every, not on the in the border, but like through rural secluded villages. So it is like indeed to stabilize everything. Feels like this history within the other regime first is to stabilize and then to uniformize. So everything looks the same, especially to regard to our sisters and brothers to the east, for example. It's like political of rice, because they know like the rice came from Java. So it's like they taught us about dependency rather than interdependency. So this is also quite problematic. And that's why it's good with Ali and Simon and Fai also mentioning about how your body is close relate and connect to like very close bodies upon this so-called family or relative. So this is generate a different way of feeling when we try to engage with our other relatives or even long lost family, sister and brothers, let's say, that came from another island, came to Java, probably 10 to 14 days in the sea. They already have like these assimilations to trade, to regard this knowledge of to regard these exchange and this and knowledge distributions, let's say, alongside their conversations, unstructural and then unorganized, and even creating timeless, because this is the structure that and then suddenly it's becoming very natural even in Jakarta's context. For example, let's say Jakarta is quite metropolis in the sense it's metropolitan area, even the greater Jakarta also quite accommodating in the sense on how this modern living catching some dreams, something like that. But in our street behavior actually is much more into this hangout, like we could just, you know, even our public transportations up until now, even we could really drop on and drop off every time you want. So it's becoming you're extending your bodies, right? It's like there's like many of U-turn, for example. It's like this behavior is like it's kind of like extending your private kind of thing. So that's why when we start to think about collective space, because most of our enemy during when we grow up in the new order regimes, our common enemy so far is first is the space. So we have to fight upon the space to identify, to positionize, also to acknowledge different space that could be relate, could be creating a friction, something like that. But body wise, we still need connected in the sense, even though it's hot, even though it's cold, even though hurting, even though painful, this is the things that we need, no? So this collective mind is always there, but we never like really challenge into what is collectivities in Indonesian's context, because what we are receiving so far is always into Western connections. Like we always, like in the art education, for example, let's see, what is artist initiative? What is ARS, like artist run space enterprises or something like that? We don't know. Like we don't know. We didn't have any this kind of discussion during our college time. So we're thinking toward about how we would like to articulate within our language. Some of our language, just like me, for example, probably Bianca's here or even Andan, how we derive that English language is our second base language in Indonesia, for example? Why not Dutch? Let's say 350 years in Indonesia, no? And after that, Japanese 3.5 years, and before that it was Portuguese. Before that it was, but this generates sense that probably we need to do some things to regard way that could be even very radical, like let's see, up until now, Indonesia is quite huge in resources. We still pay tax, if I'm not mistaken. Probably Anda know better. Like we still pay tax to our colony, to the Dutch, up until 2016, and we still pay it, and then it's already done, and then we still rich. But what do they got now? So it's just like something that kind of like a very, very interesting to the fact on how we should working collectively since the beginning, to acknowledge this particular history, to acknowledge like different kinds of the things that we may should share all together. So the notions of interactions within how we mostly time-wise we are dealing with different kind of notions, the way that you share like lovely stories, quite warm feeling to us, just to like really relate, because I never been experienced the things that happen in Adelaide, for example, the things that we know about Australia, mostly big cities, let's say. But this is also quite pity, because we are really near to each other, considering that we are neighbor. So this is also take up a big challenge when suddenly, for example, now we are try to deliver this method on resources, to think toward that. For example, if we're talking about what happened with Documenta, we always since the beginning mentions that Documenta is not institutions. We always thinking Documenta is our resource, and Documenta could see us as a part of our resource. Then why we not share? Like this is like hilarious when suddenly somebody still think that we are working for Documenta. No, actually we are acknowledging everyone resources, and then automatically we need to share these resources, because we know that we are sufficient, and then we need to deliver this surplus because it's necessities to do so. And then since that the exchange could be with anything, with organizational level, with the structures, with institutions, then we need to learn each other from that. But this bring us to this notions that dismiss what is so-called central, dismiss what is so-called staging, dismiss what is so-called Western or something like that, but also to be if we're talking about sustainability, then for sure it should be warrantable that we are reliable to each other. We are need to facing what is a rigidity trap, for example. We are came from the poverty, yes. We are came from the very unidentified something within our practices, a set of artistic practices, let's say. But in the end, we need to adjust. We need to adjust from each other and interwoven it and fill in the gap. So this is that we always try to challenge. We don't want to challenge ourselves that just to change. No, but actually we will keep these things that probably not sufficient for us still alive, because we need to accompany something, to evaluate, and mostly to criticize our practices here every now and then, and also to fill in the gap, the things that probably they miss. So we are completing the histories probably. So we always talking about the history side B. The things that we know is history side A, and it's really becoming side B.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Okay. I was just like, I think looking at the work that you do and what you've shown, I think it's very political and it's very guerrilla tactics in its understanding. And no, I love that. And I think that's clearly important in the way that you teach, or in the way that you allow your own bodies and your own artwork and your own voice to articulate exactly what you're trying to, exactly what you're trying to show community, or the locality, or the geographical urban situation. And I guess for me, I just wanted to say I really like that. But understanding, I mean, I guess what I'm asking is, why then are you seen as underground art? Is that because of street art? Is that because it comes out of America and all that kind of nonsense?
I think
Yeah.
if it's within the notion, thank you, Fai, because we also admiring what the things what Unbound Collective doing. So it is good start that actually like to regard this collective behavior. Sometimes it is quite natural that we are inspire to each others and then admiring to each other. So this is like a very good notions about this, because each of every of us for sure like having different way how to approach, but to regard these notions about the underground, I mentioned this because it's related to the new order regimes, because like
Yes,
you cannot like really show yourself in the streets and you could get really easily disappear. They have like a really different kind of monitoring devices, as well as use society as their own surveillance. So that's why, like for example, let's see, my history is grew up in the 80s, for example. I don't have a television, but I would like to see some television program, and I have to go to like this all together, like in the what's it called, like some offices, something like that, and then like in the badminton square, and then everybody was there seeing the same program all together up until 9 o'clock in the evening, and then 9 o'clock the closing is always news. So like the opening of the station is always news, and then the closing is always news, and in between there's lots of news. So it feels like, you know, every time you went in the television feels like you go into school. But this is the things that entertain us, right? So because the reasons are, it's quite simple, that we could meet your friends there, that you could like really talk about, like Andan mentions, like about someone's married to somebody's, to regard like, you know, somebody is sick or ill, it need getting help or something like that, and all these gossiping materials up until the circular economy, like the circular microeconomy, when all the housewives could even sell their cookies, for example, directly. So this is like generating more into this more into the module of thinking toward about the economy, which is in the new regime, it's governed and they create rules within this. So it is like really strange on how they try to educate us. It's also quite appropriate when do that. I mean, when this new regime have this particular system just to collect so-called cooperative work, neighborhood societies program, for example, like that, they're really good within this because they try to control us. So that's why if we need to be more strategized that addressing or criticizing our government during that time within the music, let's say, within the art exhibitions, performativities, even traditional dance, then we need to go underneath, let's say, just to be hid under different kind of layers. Like for example, probably you know this wayang, yeah, the shadow puppets. It goes 24 hours. It is not traditional because it's still happening up until now, but sometimes like during in the very critical hours, let's say like 2 or 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the evening, in the early morning, they sometimes they change the stories just to put the message in. part of this guerrilla tactic, let's say. But sometimes it's always like that, and then suddenly because people is not like really conscious enough just to read the message, because you know suddenly it's changed, like the stories change, like talking about the hierarchy, talking about the patriarchal, talking about, you know, the sense of a womanhood, the strong spirits of female gesture, and then it's different from this traditional Javanese kind of thing. So sometimes it is working like that way, but if someone noticing it and then suddenly mentioning to someone, could be like military or authority, and they will just suddenly cut it off. But at least we have different way how to approach to regard what's it is. Yeah.
Thank you.
Be playful
you.
within that.
That's really, thank you for that. That really opens up a different kind of thinking around things, like, you know, just sorry, I know others might want to ask questions. I'm really excited.
But it's good. Yeah, but it's good to
is
see
there
also.
anything you want to ask? I like the idea of market as research method.
Yeah.
The idea that you did,
so that's why we don't
in a museum. Sorry, and a museum in a museum.
Yeah.
Like
this is the thing.
thinking. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, yeah, this is part of how we are try to be, let's say, more playful in very good, because like I think Ali also, and Simon also mentioning about mostly about the performativity. So this is also, it's quite relate to way you identify your land, for example, or even your country. So this is like, it's very strong gesture that we could find out, because it should be like, for us, it should be different in each of every collective, to like really work upon something that really passionate to itself, and then bring toward this and becoming suddenly different kind of move or movement, other choreography, let's say. But we are playing in the different stage with the same wave, for example. So this is the things that we find out during the pandemics too, and suddenly we have to change what it is. Like, is it really still still useful to like really in a collective, because we're dealing with this pandemic with which like really heavy hit to like each of every individual inside the collective itself, and then how we should strategize. Once that already have family, one have a different character, one have different responsibility, one have a difficulty. So this is the things that makes us realize that it's not about generosities, because generosities feels like more into like you are in this certain power relations, right? And then this kind of like transactions, like I'm generous. So but this is more into like giving without expecting nothing in returns, like way that you always, just like you already mentioned, that how you always try to have like different approach every now and then, and especially because to regard most of you is teaching is different within us. So probably you are more into way that good to formulating some things, and then us is really messy. Different approach.
We start off messy, don't worry. We start off messy. And Ali's the one, and Ali's got these big ideas and these big thoughts, and then we go, okay, let's hang out.
Exactly. Looking forward, for sure. Looking forward. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. That was excellent. Now I feel like we can go on and on, but I'd love to hear from Ali and Simone as well. You guys are about to jump in, just wherever we sort of left that off before we wrap up.
I was just going to say that I really liked this idea of the economies of care. And I think, but also about the understanding of local knowledge, and, you know, knowledge that resonates through space and time in different kinds of ways, that allows us to connect with each other, and, you know, like for me, what really resonated was that sense of this idea of universality is, you know, we're interested in ideas, but we're also interested in honouring the spirit of country, so, or of place, in land, sea, sky. It's everything that is of that place, and thinking about what that means and what we can generate and share collectively has been like our honouring, but also a survival tactic. And so we're interested in kind of sharing that that possibility, I guess, and it is political, because it's breaking from individualism. It's saying, it's removing some of where our old people were into exclusive space. We understand knowledge holders, people who have knowledge, and they can bring that knowledge and they want to share that knowledge, but we're not interested in hierarchical exclusive space of individualism that seeks to oppress people through exclusion of having understandings or having knowledge. So that's not why we became teachers or artists, or why we are parents and community members. You know, in a sense, that is our loving contribution, because our old people don't see this kind of oppressive knowledge structure. Knowledge is loving and ethical and relational. And so we're working in an institution that is not loving, ethical, or relational necessarily. And so it's always seeking to kind of show that in ways that can be perceived as political, but aren't necessarily in our minds political. These are sustaining ways of being on collectively. That, you know, what you're talking about, you know, coming together, having dialogue, exchanging ideas, but making, because you want to share and you want to create space where there hasn't been space that's been given to you, and how we give each other permission to take that space. We give each other permission to occupy space in ways that on our own we might not see there is an opportunity. Yeah,
I agree with you, Ali, and I think what it also does is allow for new discourses, a new way of speaking about self and your people and your country, and you know, and while it's seen as you know, maybe I call it guerrilla tactics, what it does is also allow, you know, you to be seen in other ways. So you're right, the space is important in the way that you create, the way that we create everything.
I just wanted to just end, and it's something that a lot of our performances are quite gentle and quiet, even though we do have song in them as well. And Faye talks a lot about the quiet of sovereignty, so the quietness of the act of our sovereignty. And there's something quite beautiful in that, and also quite haunting as well, when you move quietly through the landscape and really think about the localized, situated context of that space in a loving and gentle way.
Thank you. That was excellent. I feel like we just can go on and on, and I feel like we should have another Zoom just to catch up in a more relaxed setting and to hang out. So
yeah, that's
I
true.
love
Yeah,
that.
let's hang out virtually, not yeah, that's
Yes.
true.
That sounds good. Thank you so much, everyone.
thank you, everyone.
Have a good evening.
Thank you for sharing.
You too.
You too.
Thank you
Take
so
good
much.
care until we met.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bianca. Sewan.